The Iron Claw is easily the most heartbreaking movie of the year, so let's talk about it. As always, this video will have spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, head over to my shorts, TikTok, or Instagram and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, let's talk about The Iron Claw. So essentially, this movie follows the true story of the famous wrestling family, the Von Erichs, and their tragic backstory in the wrestling business. And I have to say, this movie is just amazing. Starting things off with the good, and the first thing I have here is the relationship between the Von Erich brothers and their family in general. Now, this is one of the best parts of the movie for me. They really focused on the relationship that the Von Erich brothers had, and they showed just how much they loved and cared about one another, and every time they were on screen, it was just so wholesome. Whether it was them wrestling in the ring together or when they helped Mike sneak out to get to his band performance, which surprisingly became one of my favorite parts of this entire movie. The relationship between the four Von Erich brothers was truly the heart of this film and held everything together. The really cool part about this movie is that each of these brothers got their own time to shine, which really made us care about each and every one of them, and that just made this movie even more tragic when they started to die. Now, one of the things I think this movie did really good at was showing the lead up to each of the brothers' deaths. And sadly, their dad probably had a lot to do with it, and he was played beautifully by Holt McCallany. Now, I didn't like the dad at all in this movie, but that just shows how good his performance really was. I mean, you really saw how tough he was on each of the brothers in this movie and how he was really trying to live his dream through them. But the real tragic part is that his son still loved him through all of that and would go to extreme lengths just to meet those expectations of their dad. And that just made this movie even more tragic than it already was. And you can make the argument that the dad played a role in each of their deaths, which is really sad. And in my opinion, for this movie, he was kind of the force that made the dominoes start to fall. And next up for the good, I have Zac Efron. Now, all the performances in this movie were good, but Zac Efron was the standout. And this is 100%, in my opinion, his best performance yet, and this man has come such a long way since High School Musical. His performance really pulls you into this movie and you really feel the weight of what's going on. You could really empathize with his character and everything he was going through. I mean, essentially, his character felt the need to protect all his brothers, and at the end of the day, he couldn't do that, and that's another tragic part to this movie. The emotion he showed in this movie was just absolutely phenomenal, and the ending that his character got was just perfect. I mean, I said that all he wanted to do was be a part and be with his brothers, but obviously he couldn't do that. So when his sons at the end of the movie said, "Hey, we'll be your brother's dad," that was just a perfect ending to this movie and his character arc. And lastly, for the good, and I just have to add this because I am a wrestling fan, but the wrestling parts of this movie were so good and I enjoyed watching every second of the wrestling matches. It was just really cool to see some of the older wrestlers along with Ric Flair, and it really made me want to go look up some of these matches to see if I could find them online somewhere so I could watch them. And as sad as this movie was, the wrestling scenes were fun to watch as a fan and were one of my favorite parts of the movie. Now moving on to the so-so, and the only thing I have here is that this movie does have some time jumps. Now at the end of the day, this isn't really a big deal. This is a biopic, and with it covering a big amount of time, it's gonna need to have some time jumps, but I just wish there was a couple of timestamps in there to just kind of help me figure out how far these deaths were apart. Now, I know they did it a couple times with some of the wrestling matches. They gave you a year of when it was happening, but when one of the brothers would die, we would sit with that scene, we would sit with that emotion, and then we would have a time jump, and I really wouldn't know how far we jumped after that brother died. And I don't know if I missed anything, but it would have been nice to know the amount of time that passed between each death in this film, because in my opinion, I think it would have added to the emotion of this film. And yes, this film already has tons of emotion, but just knowing the time that passed between each death maybe could have helped us empathize with the characters a little bit more, knowing just if this happened in a super short amount of time over a couple years, or if this was like a decade-long thing where he lost all of his brothers. But at the end of the day, it's not really a big deal. I don't think it took away from my movie watching experience. of this film. It was just something I noticed, and it would have been a plus to kind of have. And finally, moving into the bad, and there honestly isn't that much bad in this movie, but I did find this out after the movie, and apparently a whole brother was left out of this film. Now, I understand that they cut this out to save runtime in this movie, which is something I can appreciate in a world where we're getting 3-hour plus long movies. And the director also did say that in terms of filmmaking, it just kind of felt repetitive to keep that brother in there, which is another thing that I can understand as well. But selfishly, I feel like we missed out on part of the story by cutting out this other brother, whose name was Chris, by the way, and I feel like if we had him in the film, it could have added a whole new dynamic to this thing. But that's just me, and at the end of the day, I'm okay with the director's decision to leave him out of the movie, because this movie was still phenomenal without him, and plus, it would have made this movie even sadder to add another death in there. All in all, The Iron Claw is a heartbreaking story that is filled with great performances across the board, along with a great story about the Von Erich family. Zac Efron is the standout, and if you're up to this movie, because it will break you, it is definitely a must-watch. Those are my thoughts on The Iron Claw. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments, and as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shopeasyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.